Let's get started. So here I'm here with Katie Callahan, who we're going to talk about watersheds. Katie, from 2013 to 2024, was director at Clemson University for Watershed Excellence. Certainly an expert in the field. Katie, it's great to be here with you.
Thank you, Frank. It's really great to join you.
Gave some of it, but give us a little bit of your background.
Yes, I always like to start off that I grew up on a farm in New Jersey, so I had a real relation to the land and to how water was used and played such a critical role in farm progress. So real connection to the land. I went on to a work in watershed management, starting an environmental consulting firm, but then at Rutgers in New Jersey, writing some of the first watershed management plans, co-authoring some of those, doing a lot of water quality monitoring, and then moved to Clemson. So I've had a career of almost 20 years in watershed management, water quality monitoring, and establishing the state's largest community science water quality monitoring program in South Carolina. So it's been a great ride. Water fills my cup in every way, so personally and professionally, and so I'm very passionate about how we as individuals connect with our waterways.
About, talk a little bit. Explain what a watershed is and its significance in the overall environmental management.
Yeah, especially on a day like today where we're about to receive 8 inches of rain. It's always a good time to talk about water. But picture for everyone listening, a bathtub. Okay, and the bathtub, wherever rain hits, the shower hits that bathtub, water is running down the side of the bathtub and collecting in that drain. And so a watershed is that full tub of area, square footage, or on a land surface, square miles that drains to a single point. So that drain being maybe a lake or a reservoir or a point where two rivers meet, all of that land area is a watershed. So we all live in a watershed. It can be large, like we live in the Atlantic coast watershed, the Atlantic Ocean watershed, or it can go very minute to we live in the Beaver Dam Creek watershed. So it can be large and small, but every square inch of land drains somewhere. And where that runs off to a waterway, that is your watershed.
So looking at that and knowing the importance of a watershed, what are the key components to a healthy watershed?
Yeah, so water is a very interconnected system, and the quality of our waterways and what what your waterway looks like, it really mimics land use. And so watershed health is really kind of a report card of how we manage our entire land system and the harmony that people create with nature. And so the health of your watershed again is that report card of are we living in harmony with nature, and are we overusing our resources? And so key components of a watershed, of course, is land use, soil and soil health, because of how water drains through soil system. Does it have space to drain through soil layers until it makes its way to a river? And not to forget wetlands, which are playing more and more of a critical role in climate protection and, of course, ecosystem services. Wetlands do so much for us, and more so for wildlife. So there's forested watersheds, there's urban watersheds, rural watersheds that are really defined by the land use, but all of these key components, again, really that watershed health being the report card for all of these elements working together in harmony. And people are a component of the watershed too.
So, given that we all live in a watershed and your experience, how aware are people of watershed, the value, and their responsibility with a watershed?
I had one of my best days on the job at Clemson University was we went out on the street, kind of Jim Cantori style, and interviewed people on the street. What is a watershed? And we spent all day trying to find an answer, the correct answer from our stakeholders. And that was back maybe in uh, 2011, perhaps 2012. Maybe actually a little bit earlier, but we did not get a correct answer from anyone that day. So public polls, nationwide polls usually show that less than 25% of people are typically aware of what a watershed is. But it is a critical part, whether you know the definition of a watershed or not, the fact that you're part of this landscape and have a personal responsibility and a personal connection to that waterway and how you use the land is the most significant thing. So if you don't know the definition, at least know what is the local creek name or river name that I live along, and how am I connected to it? Where's water pouring off my property or business that affects that waterway?
Oh, that's great. So what are the most common threats to watersheds, and how does it then impact the ecosystem?
Yeah, so on the downside, growth and development are significant threats to watershed health. So when you have an increase of impervious surfaces, and that's roads, rooftops, any kind of paved parking lot, that waterway, that water when it hits the parking lot is not allowed to sink into the soil. So we have to manage how much impervious surface can we have in a watershed where it's running off into a storm drain or into a ditch and hitting that river and stream at the same time. So again, just picture rainwater is coming down to a parking lot. It's being connected in those grates that you sometimes see, or in the curb. There's a gutter there in the curb. All of that hits the stream at the same time. So increases in impervious surface, and knowing how much more volume you're adding to that waterway at one time can do a lot of damage and be a significant factor. So that's where permitting comes in. And the US federal government has a part of the Clean Water Act that is supposed to manage those discharges from impervious surfaces. And once a community has so much impervious surfaces, they're supposed to follow that permit, treating that runoff as a point source of pollution. So an actual pipe hitting the stream. So managing growth and development, critical. Of course, when you have rivers that are being flooded with such volume at one time, sometimes volume in itself is a pollutant because it's tearing away the stream banks and destructing the natural channel and ecology of a stream. In addition to that, we have pollutants. More and more, we're learning about other types of pollutants like microplastics and PFAS that are affecting our waterways. Sediment is I think a critical pollutant right now for our state and for many states. Sediment keeps with it nutrients, so that combined nutrients and metals that are adhere to sediment can affect the quality of a waterway. And then bacteria is another major concern here in our state.
We know here from Lake Hartwell that I think 50 or 55 years ago, when there was a chemical dump upstream, we today are still reaping the wrath of that by the amount of fish out of the lake that can be eaten on a weekly basis and so forth. So these things last a long time when you do something to harm the waterway via the watershed.
Yeah, well, for sure, if you don't have data upfront before a situation, then you're not going to know how it affects the waterway after a situation. So collecting data in a watershed is really critical to be able to measure change and measure impacts. And the more we know and the more we can test, I think the better prepared we are to address, future circumstances and correct our actions. Fortunately, Lake Hartwell has come a long way, and it's showing really a lot of improvement in fish tissue monitoring over the past few years. So that's significant. And another way that sediment is working in our watershed, in that case, to protect us from some of those PCBs.
So have you been ever involved in a watershed restoration project of any kind?
Yeah, so I have. Thank you. So watershed restoration is when you create a plan to establish protection in a watershed and actions that will lead to healthy water quality. And healthy water quality in our permit and human and regulatory sense is meeting our water quality standards. So every waterway has a use that is assigned to it. So it might be used for drinking water, it might be used for aquatic life or recreation. And so there's standards that are assigned to that waterway and meeting those standards is what keeps that waterway in attainment, as we call it. So once it exceeds those standards, there's certain regulatory actions that must be taken, and one of those is creating a watershed restoration or watershed management plan. And the best step that I love waterways and I love fieldwork. So to me, the number one thing to do is to get out in the waterway, like get your waders on, get in the stream, walk the stream, find the pipes that are making their way that maybe aren't supposed to be there to the stream, or where people are pulling water out of a stream. Look at the bank stability. Is the channel caving in? Is there a lot of erosion around those pipes? Are people mowing straight up to the waterway? And begin your process from the river's perspective and look outside the banks. How is that river being impacted? And then really doing a land use analysis of what kind of runoff is occurring from land use, and also evaluating your wastewater system in the area.
So how should we be balancing, the human activities like agriculture and, septic systems and so forth, and urban development with the protection of our watersheds? How do we balance that?
That's like a multi-million-dollar question. So, and it's a moving target because we are growing. So here in South Carolina, we had the largest percent growth in the entire nation. I think it was from 2022 to 2023, but it might have been the year before. But the highest percentage of growth in the entire nation was seen in South Carolina. So when we talk about our natural resources, we're talking about resources really for us, and that takes a lot of balance and sometimes humility to think about that there's other needs in a watershed that are beyond a human need. So as far as like ecological balances, back to your question, I really believe in a cooperative, highly engaged effort between wastewater service providers. So looking at where do you have wastewater lines and what condition they're in, and pumping stations, and are they being maintained, mixed with an evaluation of septic systems, of course, which is your personal on-site wastewater treatment system that's in your yard or at your business. And sometimes multiple houses tap into a septic system. Is it being pumped out at least every 3 years, maybe more often in areas that require increased maintenance? Are you putting, things for a septic system? You should never put an above ground pool on the septic system. Leach field as well. Where you plant trees is important. So compaction, tree roots, all of those things can upset a septic system's function. And so making sure that homeowners are aware of maintaining their septic system, what they should put down the drain and what they shouldn't. That goes for apartments and homes too, on wastewater services, not dumping fats, oils, and grease down the drain. That's a major issue for clogging, causing overflows of sewer systems into our waterways, which again is, keep in mind, that's real wastewater just spilling over into stream. And for anyone who wants to jump online and just Google fatberg, you can see FATBERG. You can look at how much fats, oils, and grease have clogged major cities underground wastewater systems. So little actions can make big improvements for our waterway. And so looking at wastewater services in the watershed is one major component. Evaluating our land use and how we manage and treat runoff from our land uses is the next big component. And then you come together with those problems that you may have identified and start to come up with some action items. How can we fix this situation? And it really takes, like, a watershed is so comprehensive, this combination of everyone that lives in a watershed plan needs to be extremely cooperative and engage all stakeholders.
So what are some of the key indicators that a watershed is healthy?
Yeah, so we actually have little, I should have had something that I could pull up in this instance, but we have small organisms and bugs and insects, larvae that live in a stream, and they are like the canary in a coal mine. So while we might be able to take a quick water sample, and that provides kind of a snapshot in time of what the health of that waterway is, bugs and insects that live in the bottom of the stream are indicators of the long-term health, or maybe not long-term, but several months to a year, or to 2 years of the health of that waterway. So if you have, if your stream is dominated by pollution tolerant organisms, then you know that you don't have a very high quality waterway, because certain bugs will only live in high quality waterways where there's lots of oxygen, lots of flow, not a lot of pollution, not a lot of sediment coming in. And so those bugs can be an indicator of stream health, and they're really important to assess. And the state does that twice a year here in South Carolina, and other states have different protocols. But looking at the bugs and then looking at our water quality, and you can do, of course, meters that stay in the stream and evaluate water quality, and take snapshots on a recorded time period, or you can take samples out of the stream and test them in a lab.
So really, the watershed, just like our waterways and bodies of water, impact us all. From economics to health to human, the value and long life of human capital and so forth. So pretty stunning. And to know that every one of us, no matter where we live in a watershed.
Yeah.
So any as we final thoughts or key items on the importance of a healthy watershed?
Yeah. So I think, action items for anyone viewing: find out what is your nearest creek and waterway that you live near, and how does your property drain, whether it's your business, your church, your school, your home. How does that drain? How does your property drain to that waterway? And then how can you better manage any kind of runoff that's coming from your property to that waterway? And then really on a whole scale, education is so critical. And there's a lot of educational programs that are offered in every state. Clemson Extension has a lot of services to offer for healthy yards programs or pond management programs. But I'd like to speak maybe on a city and county kind of level. If you look at cities like San Antonio, Texas, if you've ever been to the Riverwalk down there, more needs to be done to turn our attention to our waterways. So often they're behind, trees of kudzu or privet, and really connecting and seeing that waterway. I'm not necessarily advocating for mowing down to a waterway, because you need to have a healthy riparian buffer to absorb pollutants between you and your waterway. But as we grow, as we develop, as we plan for growth, turning our eyes to the waterway and having an eye on its health on a regular basis, I think is one of the easiest ways to raise awareness and build that connection. Just look at like the Swamp Rabbit Trail along the Reedy River, like being able to engage with that river and have it become part of your life, because in history, water has always been this central gathering place and this really important element of life. And we're so trained to just get water out of our tap and flush it away, and we don't really have always, and our roads have gutters, and so we don't have flooding, but it doesn't mean that it's not important and imperative to your quality of life, because cities in the future that, in my opinion, and have healthy waterways are going to be our most thriving cities, because we can kind of mastermind all of these other services, but water quality is a community effort, and it takes protection, and the stains of our past can't be undone overnight. So recognizing that water's importance in your future and the next generation's quality of life and quality of community is an action and an acknowledgement we need to take right now.
No question. I grew up in Cleveland, Ohio. The Cuyahoga River in Cleveland, Ohio, finally on its 13th fire. It was the 13th fire that caused awareness that there's something wrong here.
Yeah.
And got cleaned up. I mean, some part of the EPA came out of that, Clean Water Act, a lot of it came out of that.
Yes.
But today, you can catch walleye in that same river.
Yeah, it's
It was so
amazing.
polluted, it was on fire.
It's so amazing. Actually, the Cuyahoga River caught on fire over 100 times by the time the Clean Water Act was passed. And the fact, yeah, by the time the act was actually passed and signed by Richard
Oh,
Nixon, it caught on fire over 100 times. And that I have sampled myself in marshes that set themselves on fire. So how embracing how nature and natural processes can also play a role in remediation is really important, but it's a community effort, and there's science and there's innovation and there's natural solutions, and we certainly have I think as scientists, as leaders, a lot of work to do, and but it takes every individual and their awareness to demand that change and awareness of the connection between healthy waterways and future healthy economy and healthy quality of life. That bubbles up from the bottom, and it really needs to be a holistic, bottom up demand, top down resources, and we are very fortunate to be blessed by so much water, but not to take it for granted.
for sure. Katie, this has been truly informative and fascinating, and I appreciate you so much taking the time with me this morning. Certainly enjoyed this, and of course also enjoy working with you on Lake Hartwell Partners for Clean Water. Have a wonderful day, and as we come into the storm tomorrow, stay dry.
Yeah, that might be tough, but
It'll
I
be
just
tough.
want to stay with power. But thank you, Frank. This has been a pleasure, and we really have a great team. And I really hope that this video has been helpful to everyone.
I think so. I think it is.